My name's Aaron Long. I run recruiting at Caliber Home Loans, which is about a 6,000 person full service mortgage lender. So we are a non-bank full service company, which means that we basically put people in homes through originations and purchase transactions in the mortgage business. And then we also service those home loans, which is kind of unique in our category. So we've got about a couple of $100 billion portfolio, which is about the equivalent of around 750,000 families that pay Caliber their mortgage every month. So we're continuously growing and evolving. I've been here about 6 years. My recruiting career is 12, 13 years. I've been lucky enough to sort of be in a couple of safe, so to speak, categories as we've been through a couple of these downturns and seen a couple of these cycles. But when I started my recruiting career, I was in field marketing, which was sort of like overtaking a lot of the advertising budgets for what used to go into commercials, television commercials. When people started fast forwarding through those, field marketing companies started delivering commercials straight in a person to person transaction. So there was a large marketing dollars that went into those campaigns that I was staffing. And then, moving into Caliber, we're in the mortgage business. So it's a very interesting time right now to be in that space, but it's also very important that we, that we service our own home loans because we're a privately held non-bank lender. So we're getting people in homes, which is obviously important. But we're also keeping them in their homes. So at a time like this, when families are, struggling to make payments and, missing mortgage payments, Caliber is the company that steps in to keep them in their homes by offering different products, moving the money around. And so, serving our customers as a whole new meaning today. But so very happy to be here and very proud to be, representing Caliber. And, we've done a lot of work with the Career Center. We are doing a lot of hiring and, I had some sort of unique experiences in recruiting. So hopefully hoping I can add some value today. That would certainly be amazing.
Thanks, Aaron. And Aaron is being a little modest there, that we have a number of students and recent graduates that are actually in training with these guys right now. So they've been very, very good to our students and alumni so far. And we appreciate that. This is just a listing of some resources that the Career Center either has for you or we've created for you over the past 3 or so months. I think my colleagues in the Career Center have just been fantastic about coming up with different ways to provide more information. And so I hope that you take advantage of these resources, because again, we're in a time where resources really matter. I'm going to talk a little bit about some concepts that hopefully will help you to either get started or continue to move forward in your career planning. And one of the most important things, I think, in a challenging job market is to stay positive. I found this quote from Dr. Michael Carroll, who's director of the Economics Research Group, and he's a professor of economics at UNT. And I loved it because I think that he's spot on. The good news is good candidates will be hired no matter what the economic environment is. Firms are always looking for somebody regardless of how the economy is. And we're seeing that happen right now. But in some cases, what's happening is that students or new graduates are kind of just assuming there's nothing really going on out there because they're kind of just reading the kind of overview that you get in the media about what's going on and not digging a little deeper to see where the opportunities are. And this is directly related to, some of you may have heard this term, grit, right? And so I'm not going to read this whole quote to you, but Dr. Angela Duckworth has done a tremendous amount of research on what makes people successful or how they get to how they reach their goals, basically. And you know, it really starts with understanding what it is that, what's your big goal? What's your overall arching goal? And it doesn't necessarily have to be your work goal. It has to be like your goal, it may be your goal for how you're going to live your life or something like that, right? And then all of the things that you do that are directly related to that goal, those tasks make up this whole grit thing. So grit is about staying positive, working towards being successful, and sticking with it, basically. And you stick with it because it's something that's worth you continuing to work on. You know, some days are better than others, and some days are great. And so you just have to keep, and some days aren't so great, and then you go back and you reevaluate to see what you can do differently or better. So staying positive is important. The other part of staying positive is that everybody I know in this is the third or fourth kind of challenging job market that I've worked through in 20 plus years. Okay. And so everybody I know that's really gotten negative, their job search is kind of over at that point. And so one of the things that I would just tell you is that it's important to stay positive. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is the sphere of control. Some of you may be familiar with Stephen Covey. This is not a Stephen Covey or 7 Habits of Highly Effective People workshop. There's tons of workshops about that. But I do think that there's one aspect of what they talk about in the 7 Habits, and that is this idea of sphere of influence. Okay? And notice that there are many, many, many things outside of your sphere of influence. There's lots of things going on in the world right now that we cannot control, okay? But it is possible for us to expand our sphere of control. And we do that by doing, and in the case of career planning, by doing some things that are related to, one, doing your research and understanding what the job markets are. 2, being able to really communicate with people who are recruiting you. Thirdly, understanding where the opportunities are, right? And fourthly, really, I think networking. So the more of those kinds of things that you engage in, the more you're going to influence things, or the more you're going to expand your sphere of influence. And I see this happening to people all the time. And a good example of that is on LinkedIn, right? They're working their network on LinkedIn. They're showing interest on LinkedIn. They're doing research into where the jobs are and what the opportunities are. And a lot of times they really end up with a very positive outcome because they've stuck with it. All right. The last thing that I wanted to kind of just talk about that I think is really important is this idea of planned happenstance. Planned happenstance is, there's actually research on this, and basically it's, the idea is that you're creating a chance, creating chance events that turn into actual opportunities. Okay. And there's actual research on this where they've gone out and they've asked people, it's like, how did you get your job? And people will say things like, well, I was talking to this, you know, this lady, and she was a business owner, and she was explaining to me what her business was. And I didn't even know that business was existed, but it was really interesting to me. So I went out and I started learning more about it, and I stayed in contact with her, and she was impressed that I was curious about it, you know, and stayed with it, and she offered me a job. So this is how a lot of people end up in the jobs they have. One of the things that you hear about a lot is a lot of people don't end up working in careers that they started off in, or maybe even directly related to their major. Okay, this is planned happenstance because people are taking advantage of opportunities and learning about those opportunities as they come along. And I think that these 4 things, these 4 characteristics, of planned happenstance are particularly important right now in a difficult job market, because as you're out there talking to people, doing research and networking, you are finding out about opportunities in places that you maybe didn't even know existed, or in things that you never thought of before. Or you're connecting the dots from the standpoint of, well, this isn't really where I want to land in the long term, but it's a really good short-term opportunity, and I can learn something from it and then do something with what I learn and move towards where I eventually want to get. The other thing about this is that sometimes we land in places that we didn't expect to, or we do something that we kind of wouldn't have thought we would want to do, and we end up finding out, hey, this is pretty good. I didn't think it was going to be that good, but it really is. I want to do more of it. So, and these three steps are not just about planned happenstance, but I think that they are really important in the big picture of job searching. Okay, preparation, right, is so key. Your goals, what you want to offer, and understanding what the employer needs, right? Practice, communication. Aaron and I were prepping for this yesterday, and we were talking about how important just being able to introduce yourself is, just saying, just being able to sound polished in your presentation, right? And then the last part of it is being open, which means that we're looking for opportunities. We're not saying, oh, you know, that's not something I'd be interested in or anything. But when we have the opportunity to learn something more about an area, that we just go ahead and we do it, right? And don't dismiss something because it doesn't necessarily meet your initial expectations. So a few things that I would that I wanted to kind of bring to your attention that are kind of trending right now in the in job searching and career planning. You're going to read a lot about companies that are going to offer people early retirements, and we've had a number of layoffs. And on its face, that sounds bad, and it certainly is not necessarily good for the people that it's happening to. So I don't want to not be sensitive to that. But where it has some but what we can talk about is for new graduates is what happens within these organizations that are doing these things. Because typically, especially on the early retirement piece of it, it's people that have been with the company for a longer period of time, and the company they've got high salaries, and so the company decides they can save some money by letting them retire early. But what ends up happening is a lot of times it cycles back, and they start recruiting people at the entry level for some of the responsibilities that the early retirees did, because in a lot of cases they were doing work that needs to get done. So as you're reading about these companies, when they're offering those kinds of retirement packages, you may want to circle back to them in 3, 6, 9 weeks afterwards, because you may start to see some things come up at the entry level. The layoffs is a little bit different, because the first thing, and we're already starting to see this with some companies that did that. A lot of them that are starting to hire people back now are going to the original people that they laid off. In some cases, people have moved on though already. And so, or they've made decisions to go do other things. Maybe they decided, oh, I'm going to go get a graduate degree and I'm going to, lay out of the job market for a little while or something like that. So you want to pay attention to that when you see that happening, because again, in some series of weeks, some of the work that was being done, they actually end up hiring people back. So 3 months to 6 months sometimes is kind of the cycle on this. Industries on the upswing, right? If you think about kind of what's going on right now in the economy. Um, there's a number of different things that are happening, and there are a number of organizations that have done pretty well, or at least are maintaining, if not sort of increasing. So, the big box retailers, and of course, the Amazons of the world, and that kind of thing. So consumer goods, right? But also, there's a lot going on in healthcare right now, even on the business side of that. Even on there's a lot going on in logistics and supply chain right now. And I don't expect that to change a whole lot. A lot going on in the finance industry, which Aaron is part of, right? And also in tech and financial technology in DFW is a really dynamic area that has continued to grow even as, we've seen kind of a downturn in the number of actual job openings. Networking is definitely a trend right now, because getting to know people and getting their getting them to be advocates for you or make referrals for you, huge, right? And the last part, go ahead, Aaron.
Brad, I got to say that's one of the most important things. I mean, when you talk about referrals and you talk about people championing you, I think it's important to champion other people as well. I'll give you a couple examples. I mean, first of all, to back up just a little bit on some of these great points, I'm a recruiter, right? I mean, I didn't go to school. I didn't go to UNT to be a recruiter, right? And the things that I learned in school were totally valuable, of course, and taught me some of the fundamentals of how to keep my life together and stay motivated and all the other things. But it turns out some of the most valuable things were the people that I met, right? And so when I got into the workforce and 100 years ago or whatever, I didn't know what I was going to do either, and it really truly everything can be traced back to 5 or 6 of my buddies that were friends in college. We were friends in college that we all ran together, and they ended up becoming recruiters at this one company at Mosaic where I started, and they championed me and got me in the door, and that became my career. It caught me so off guard. I had no idea that I was, even down to the first day where I'm on the phones and I'm totally terrified to make that phone call, when I have no idea what I'm talking about. Of course, I bombed the first few times, right? But as I started to get comfortable and be able to share a compelling story and listen and I got better at it, it turns out that you can make money blabbing on and talking, which is wonderful for me, right? So, but I think it goes back to networking. I mean, championing each other, because if you're championing somebody, then somebody's championing you. So I think that's really important. We can talk more about some of those things. I really wanted to jump in there and just comment on how important that is.
And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And the last thing is this idea of showing resiliency, and specifically employers are kind of asking this question right now. It's like, so what did you do during COVID-19? And what they're interested in is you're being able to talk about basically your resilience. This has been kind of a challenging time. Some of you may have struggled with, I was taking these classes and they were all in person, and all of a sudden they were all online, right? And the professors were all over the place. How did I deal with that and still make good grades, right? And there can be any number of other things. How did you deal with kind of being on lockdown at home? How did you turn that into a positive? So they're really asking about those things right now, actually in job interviews. But the other thing is that you can bring some of that stuff up too, because when you start you know, putting forward your successes, even without being asked, I think that that communicates to the employer that you've got capabilities that they're looking for. Now, one thing, and this is related to what Aaron was talking about on referrals, right? Notice this, about 70% of the time, recruiters are going to start with their own network and internal referrals, okay? And what that means is that they're going to wait a lot of times to post a job. The job may be open, but they may not post it publicly. It might only be an internal posting. Well, how do you find out about all of these jobs that you can't see, that we sort of say are in the hidden market? That's networking, right? And the only way to really do that is to do your homework and see where the opportunities are, to, you know, get out and meet people. By the way, one of the most outstanding resources that's out there is on LinkedIn for you guys. It's called, there's a UNT school page there, and there's over 200,000 alumni that are in there. So some of you, I recognize some of your names and you've met with me, and I probably showed pretty much everybody I meet with that page because I think it's so powerful. I think it's important that when you network with somebody and they don't know you, to start off with an open-ended question. So just, what advice would you have, is a really great question, right? And remember that it is a process. The person has to get to know you first. And you have to have this messaging thing, right? You have to have a message. By the way, one of the mistakes that people make on LinkedIn that I think is really, you can improve your results a lot, is when you invite somebody to be a connection, there's a little thing on there where you can put a note, right? And send them a note. Why are you asking them to be a connection? It makes it more likely that they'll accept. So, but again, you know, you're making the first move. This is your outreach to them, okay? And what I'm really hoping for in this process is that somebody would say, hey, why don't you send me your resume? Let me tell you about somebody who you need to talk to, okay? And so if they ask you to do something, or tell you you should do something, right? It's very important that you follow up, right? Almost always, if I make a recommendation for you to contact somebody, I'm going to talk to them and say, hey, don't be surprised if this student, you know, reaches out to you. And so if you don't, then you know, it's not a real positive outcome. All right. And so all of this is related to this whole messaging thing, where, you know, if you were to go to the virtual career fair next week, right? And when you're in the process of introducing yourself, as I always say, do you sound prepared? Okay. Because, and you know, Aaron can tell you this because he goes to job fairs all the time. He's meeting people all the time, and he's making a decision about whether or not this person has kind of made it past the first cut, you know, pretty much based on that introduction, right? If he's not impressed, you know, or at least can't come away with that knowing that person had something to say and was interested, you know, or interesting, then that is a problem, right? The other thing to remember about your personal branding is that it is verbal, but it's also nonverbal. So when you go to the virtual career fair next week, make sure you're business, at least business casual, but probably, you know, business attire, at least from the waist up, right? So you look like you're prepared, right? And then the last piece of it is that your brand is also on an online presence, because recruiters are going to go look at your LinkedIn profile. If they're in Handshake, they're going to go look at your Handshake profile. And in a lot of cases, they're going to go look, they're going to do a Google search on your name to see what comes up. And what they're looking for there is, how will you represent them as a person, right? Because, you know, the example I give is, you know, I go to the grocery store down the street, and that's for personal, you know, that's just me personally, but I still work for UNT. So if I go to the grocery store and I'm not a nice person, and people know that I work in UNT, it reflects negatively on the university, whether I want it to or not. And so that's why recruiters go out and they try to get an idea of how you might represent them. So make sure you have a good online presence that works in your favor and not against you. Here are some things, and one of the things that I talk a lot about with students is communicating your skills and being able to tell an employer what it is you can do. And the way that you do that is by giving examples, okay? It's not enough just to say, I'm flexible. You have to prove it to them. You have to give them a situation from work or school or family or something like that that shows that you're flexible. This was from an article that was appeared last week. What skills are employers want most during the pandemic? And so Andrew Seaman, who's a kind of expert in job searching and that kind of thing, went out and did this survey, and this is what he came back with. And flexibility and adaptability is almost always in the list, but it's shot to the top. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? And then this staffing executive, is critical that job seekers define the results they have achieved, right? And so giving those examples. It really is true that most of the time, if you get to an interview, the reason why you don't get the job offer is because you didn't do a good job of describing your skills, right? And connecting those skills to what the employer needs. So you have to practice that part of it, right? And so that's one of the things, unfortunately, we, you know, in this format, we really can't do a whole lot of, we couldn't really practice it, but I would really recommend that you take some time and start figuring out what your most critical skills are that are the most critical skills that the employer needs you to do, and that you start thinking about how you can give examples of those things in an interview. And then just think about who your audience is, think about what the message is about. And again, it's about your skills and experiences primarily. And then the other piece of it has to be that it has to address what the employer's interact. If you're telling the employer something in an interview situation, especially, but even in writing through a cover letter or in your, why are you telling them that? Right? That's very important to think about. I want you to be aware, if some of you've heard me talk about this before in the past, but there are automated search tools that recruiters are using now. There's an automated search tool in LinkedIn. Employers pay for automated search tools that can search LinkedIn and other resources out there. And what it's really looking for are the keywords, and those keywords are directly related to the skills that they need. So as you're putting together your brand, as you're putting together your LinkedIn, your handshake on your resume, try to think about, excuse me, language that you can embed in those things that's reflective of what the employer needs. This was just, this came from Handshake, actually. These were the biggest recruiting industries in in Handshake. And a couple of things. Don't discount education and teaching. Not that most business majors, which most of you guys are, want to go out and be teachers. So a lot of those jobs are teaching jobs. But there's also a lot going on right now in educational automation. So companies like Canvas, right? They're growing like crazy right now, and they need business people. They need people, you know, so it's education technology and applications, but they need marketing people, they need accountants, they need all of those kinds of things. So, you know, I'm just showing you this because I think this is a good resource that helps us to understand where in industry wise, what's kind of the driver right now of job postings. And just remember that while the primary jobs might be specific to that industry, all of these, the jobs that are posted in these industries are by businesses, and those businesses they hire for business people. So keep that in mind, and continue to watch those trends as we go forward, because we're going to start seeing now, I think, some things begin to shift a little bit as we start as the recovery starts, and we're opening up more broadly. All right. Hey, Aaron.
Yes, sir.
You want to talk about networking?
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that. I didn't want to interrupt. You got such a nice rhythm going on here. So I think really, even going back to, let's just jump right back into you know, a little bit of my story, because I definitely can speak to that. So when you're talking about, first of all, having your, kind of taking a few of these things, having your LinkedIn, your profile photo nice, having all of your, you know, your resume ready, and then having your elevator pitch ready, super, super important. Your values, what's important to you. And then again, you know, talking about having your elevator pitch ready and tying it back into what you've been doing since COVID, which you started talking about this, we all have that in common, right? I mean, we all have that in common. So that right there should take a little bit of the pressure off having that conversation with the recruiter from the beginning, because everybody's going through this, literally, right? But, you know, it's interesting when you have all of those fundamentals together, and things will start to click, right? And so when you're talking to a recruiter, I'll give you an example. When you're talking to a recruiter and you're interviewing for a particular job, if you have the soft skills and fundamentals that you're communicating clearly, then the recruiter is a talent scout. And the recruiter's job is to find and I'm not talking about a third-party placement recruiter. I'm talking about even somebody in my shoes that has specific positions to fill. A recruiter like me has multiple different kinds of positions, or knows other recruiters within the organization that need certain types of candidates or certain types of new hires. So if you're articulating yourself the right way and you have these very important fundamentals that you've hit almost all of them, then a recruiter could get to work for you and is the talent scout for you. So that's just one little bitty tiny, you know, piece of the networking, and how it can how baby steps can turn into leaps. And, you know, I'll tie that right back into my own personal story. You know, I like to talk, right? And so when, you know, I would like to imagine, or, you know, it's funny to imagine what it was like when my friends, you know, heard that there was a job interview, you know, 14 years ago, and that it was, you know, being on the phones and recruiting, and somebody goes, Aaron, yeah, that guy, you know, let's get him. You just, you know, talk to people, right? And so I think, you know, some of that is that all those things sort of tie in together, and it's very interesting how they do. And it's by no accident, right? And so, you know, sometimes, you know, it's a very competitive market right now. And I think that, you know, it can be challenging. But, you know, the good news is that you're on this call, or you're listening to this call, which means that you're already doing the right things, because this is how it happens. This is how it works. So, you know, I think I hopefully I touched on networking there, but those are some of the things that are really, really top of mind to me.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a couple of things that I would just, and these are just like little tips, right? And I already mentioned the one thing about making those connections in LinkedIn and using that messaging kind of thing when you click on the connect button. Most students don't realize this, but there's actually in your Handshake account, there's a messaging tool that the employers can use. And a lot of times students get messages kind of randomly from these random employers, and they look at it and they go, well, I'm not interested in that job at all. But I think that you should take it as an opportunity to network. So it's perfectly okay for you to respond back to that person and say, thank you so much for, for reaching out to me. I'm really, majoring in business analytics. So I'm hoping to land in a business analytics thing. So I'm not really interested in a sales job right now, but I do appreciate that. Well, you never know. That recruiters talk to each other. They may know other recruiters that are looking for business analytics people.
Always do.
Yeah, they may know of a job internally, and it might not be their job to hire somebody for that particular position, or maybe they know the hiring manager in that department.
Mm-hmm.
So you just never know where responding to these things could potentially lead you. So that's kind of, it's just one more resource and one more little technique that you can do to kind of move yourself forward.
It almost always doesn't work the way you planned it to work.
Right.
That is almost always true, at least in my experience, and Brian's agreeing. And then, don't be afraid to try new things and take risks, because there's no way that you're going to be able to plan this thing out. And while I'm on the subject, one of the most important things to me when I'm interviewing candidates is one word: it's enthusiasm. It's really the most important thing. As long as you have enthusiasm, then you're not wasting anybody's time, and a recruiter will bend for anybody that's enthusiastic and has, charisma, not necessarily just natural charisma, but just charisma about networking, and charisma about spending time together on the phone and talking about things and learning things about each other and sharing stories is what I always like to say. The very first thing I always do whenever I get somebody, in my world, which is, high performing loan officers, it's very tough to get them on the phone. Then one of the very first things I always talk about is, let's go ahead and set a time. I can't wait to share stories. And it sort of takes a lot of the pressure off of talking business and talking money and compensation and opportunity. And when you kind of peel back that layer and you really get down to the human aspect of it, it's just having enthusiasm for each other's space and being open to letting ech other drive that. Anywho.
Yeah. One other thing that is going to happen is I'm going to be sending you everybody who I have an email for through your registration for this event. I'll be sending you an invitation to, this is our new mentoring platform called Mean Green Mentors. It's a little bit different from LinkedIn. But again, it's it's new. So you'll be kind of the trailblazers as far as trying to figure out, how best to use it for yourself. But in the next few days, you should be getting an invite for that. If you put your email in your UNT email in the system, and if not, you can shoot me an email and say you'd like an invite, and I'll send you one. All right. So here are a few things. These are just some more resources. I want to give you some concrete things that you can go to. In addition to the regular Handshake thing where you go and you search for jobs and you have your profile and everything, Handshake has this blog, which is learn.joinhandshake.com. There's a whole student section in there. Handshake's in 800 universities, and there's millions of students in there, which means they have data, okay? And so they've got articles on there where they're going, okay, here are some great opportunities for remote work right now. Just as one example. And so that's a really good resource for you to pay attention to. On LinkedIn, there's a hashtag now hiring. I was just looking at it today. They had some interesting jobs on there, so that were kind of in that feed. I'm a big advocate for professional associations. So, for instance, if you're a marketing major, do you know people in the American Marketing Association? We have a campus chapter for those of you that are not getting ready to graduate. We have a campus chapter of most professional organizations or for most majors, and then there's professional chapters. So there's an AMA chapter in Dallas and one in Fort Worth. And a lot of times they let students come to their meetings. Do you want to get more experience related to the work that you've got? There's a couple of resources that we have here. There's this Parker Dewey is a new thing that we're tied in. None of this costs any money, by the way, right? So you can go out and get like these micro internships that are up to about 40 hours worth of work, and they'll pay you, right? Flex Jobs does charge a monthly fee. And then there's some other remote kinds of things, or these are like part-time project-based work. So maybe if you are in a position where you're in a job search and you're needing to find some things to do to get more experience, but also to make a little bit of money, some of these things might be opportunities for you to take advantage of. So here are my final thoughts before we'll take some questions in a minute. But stay positive, make a plan. If you were a senior at the beginning of last quarter, you probably thought, hey man, we're going along great. It's a great job market. Don't need much of a plan. Things have changed a lot. I think needing a plan, having a plan is important now. Be prepared, do your research, networking. Be on the lookout for opportunities, and if you can create the opportunities for yourself, and again, that goes right back to networking, right? And then the final thing is follow up. Again, one of the most important parts of job searching and job application is actually following up. And so one of the cool things about Handshake is that in most cases, you can find a contact with the company that's directly tied to that company's profile in Handshake. So if you apply for a job, you can go and you can send an email to that person to thank them for the job posting and let them know that you're available or that you're interested in next steps. All right. So this is our contact information. In the Career Center, we're here. We're open this summer. We're doing meetings by Zoom, one-on-ones, and so you can get in contact with there's 4 staff, and in fact, the other 3 staff members, Destiny, D, and Beth, are probably better at this than I am.